You ever wonder why someone pulls away right when things feel close? Why, just as your heart opens, they build walls so high you can't even see them anymore? It's maddening, confusing, and it makes you question your own value. But what if I told you it was never about you, that their withdrawal isn't a reaction to your love, but to their fear? You see, people with avoidant tendencies aren't afraid of you. They're afraid of being seen. They're afraid that if they let someone in, even for a second, that person might actually see them messy, flawed, and vulnerable. So instead, they perform strength, they act indifferent, they love at a distance. Not because they don't feel, but because feeling terrifies them. And here's where so many of us get caught. We think, if I just love them better, they'll stay. We believe our consistency can heal their inconsistency. And so we give more, we chase more, we shrink ourselves into palatable pieces so they don't get overwhelmed. But every time we do, we reinforce their belief that closeness is danger and distance equals control. But then something happens, something beautiful. You stop trying to decode their silences. You stop losing sleep over their coldness. You stop chasing the version of them you built in your imagination and start seeing the truth. That they're not emotionally unavailable because you're not enough, they're unavailable because they don't feel safe enough to be close to anyone. And that's their journey, not your burden. It's in this shift, this sacred pause, that everything changes because now you are the one who's in control. You've stepped out of the cycle. You no longer give energy to patterns that drain you. You no longer confuse intensity for intimacy. You understand them now, not from a place of pain, but from a place of peace. And this, right here, is when avoidants crumble. Not because you punished them, not because you yelled or begged or blocked them, but because you stopped needing them to be anything other than what they are. You stopped participating in the dance. And in doing so, you took back your power. When you truly understand this, when you finally get it on a soul level, they feel it. They feel the energy shift. The attention they once took for granted disappears. The emotional lifeline they relied on is no longer extended, and for the first time, they're the one left wondering. You've become unshakable. Not because you hardened, but because you healed. And in your healing, you've done the very thing they couldn't. You've chosen growth over comfort, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over scarcity. You didn't walk away to make them chase you. You walked away because you finally realized you didn't need to chase anyone. That's when avoidants always crumble. When you stop proving your worth because you finally remember you never had to. So many people internalize the rejection or coldness of an avoidant partner, believing that their distance is a reflection of something they did wrong. But the truth is far more layered than that. When someone with avoidant attachment starts to pull away, it's not a response to your love being too much too fast or too needy. It's a reaction to any form of intimacy that brushes against the walls they've built around their heart. The moment you begin to get close to see them fully, it threatens the fragile identity they've constructed to protect themselves. Because closeness isn't just affection to them, it's danger. And to survive, they distance. Avoidants don't fear you. They fear vulnerability. They fear being fully seen without their defenses, without their image, without control. They've often spent a lifetime learning how to be self-sufficient, how to regulate their own emotions alone, how to armor themselves against disappointment. Somewhere in their past, closeness may have meant abandonment. Love may have meant manipulation. Being needed or needing someone might have felt like a trap, a loss of self. So now when someone comes along and offers them genuine connection, their instincts tell them to run. Not because it isn't real, but because it is, and real love to an avoidant feels terrifyingly unsafe. When you love someone like this, you may begin to question yourself. You might think, maybe I'm too much. Maybe I'm coming on too strong. Maybe if I just step back, be more chill, they'll come closer. But this only deepens the wound. You shrink, you overthink, you water yourself down to make them feel comfortable. But none of this changes the root issue. They're not afraid of you. They're afraid of intimacy. Afraid that if they let someone in, they'll be overwhelmed, consumed, or ultimately betrayed. This fear doesn't mean they don't care. In fact, most avoidants feel more deeply than they let on. But the more they care, the more they retreat, because their nervous system is wired to associate closeness with unpredictability or pain. So when you get closer, they subconsciously create distance to feel safe again. That might look like pulling away after a great date, suddenly becoming cold after being warm, or finding fault in you right when things are going well. It's not about your behavior, it's about their programming. Understanding this is incredibly liberating because it releases you from taking their actions personally. You begin to see that their coldness isn't about your worth. Their retreat isn't a reflection of your value. It's about their relationship with intimacy and their own fear of being known. And when you stop seeing their behavior as a test you have to pass or a puzzle you have to solve, you start to come home to yourself again. It's heartbreaking to love someone who keeps you at arm's length. It's painful to try and reach for someone who seems terrified of being held. But the power in understanding that their distance is rooted in fear, not your failure, is that it allows you to stop the spiral of self-doubt. You begin to honor your needs without apologizing for them. You begin to realize that someone else's fear of love doesn't have to rob you of the love you deserve. What they're fighting isn't you. It's the part of themselves that never felt safe enough to be seen. And when you grasp that truth, you stop trying to force closeness with someone who can't receive it. You stop blaming yourself for someone else's emotional limits. You stop begging for scraps when you're capable of building a banquet. And that, right there, is when everything starts to change. When you care deeply for someone who keeps pulling away, your instinct is often to move closer, to fix, to reassure, to love them harder in hopes that it will break through the emotional walls they've put up. You think, if I just prove I'm safe, if I'm patient enough, kind enough, understanding enough, they'll finally relax and choose me fully. But this, meaning effort, often has the opposite effect. What feels like love to you feels like pressure to them. What feels like closeness to you feels like invasion to them. And the more you chase, the more they retreat, not out of cruelty, but out of fear and self-preservation. Avoidant individuals often operate from an internal blueprint that equates intimacy with loss of control. When you move closer, emotionally, physically, or through any expectation of emotional reciprocity, they can feel overwhelmed as if their space, identity, or emotional independence is under threat. And when that threat rises, their defense mechanisms kick in. They create distance. They delay replies. They withdraw affection. They pick fights over minor issues. It's not because they don't feel anything for you. It's because feeling something makes them panic. Here's the hard truth most people miss every time you chase them. Every time you bend yourself to make them stay, you are unconsciously confirming their fear that closeness is dangerous and that people will always want something from them. It reinforces their belief that love is a trap and that they can't be safe within it. You become another reminder of the emotional burden they fear, someone who requires more from them than they feel capable of giving. But this doesn't just affect them, it affects you deeply. Because while you're busy chasing, convincing, proving, and waiting, you lose sight of yourself. You begin to over-function in the relationship, trying to manage their emotions, explain yours, interpret their moods, and anticipate their next withdrawal. You become addicted to the moments when they do show up, when they're warm or affectionate or vulnerable, because those fleeting moments give you just enough hope to keep trying. But this cycle always leads you back to the same place: exhaustion, confusion, and emptiness. When you chase an avoidant, it doesn't teach them how to be emotionally available. It teaches them that they can offer you the bare minimum and still have you. It teaches them that their inconsistency will always be met with forgiveness, that their distance will always be closed by your effort. And as long as that dynamic stays in place, there is no motivation for change. Why would they change when you're doing all the emotional heavy lifting for both of you? The most powerful shift happens when you stop chasing, not as a strategy to get them back, but as a commitment to yourself. When you stop running towards someone who only knows how to run away, you disrupt the pattern. You send a message not just to them, but to your own nervous system that you are no longer available for emotional imbalance. You choose stillness instead of pursuit. You choose clarity over confusion. You choose peace over chaos. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care enough about yourself to stop trying to prove your worth to someone who can't see it clearly. It means you understand that real love doesn't have to be hunted down, coerced, or dragged out to someone. It flows freely from a place of safety, mutual respect, and emotional maturity. The paradox is, when you finally stop chasing, the dynamic changes. Sometimes the avoidant partner feels the shift and is forced to confront the space left by your absence. But even if they don't, you will have made the most important move of all, breaking free from the cycle of proving, fixing, and shrinking. You'll have chosen your own emotional well-being over the illusion of love. And that choice is what sets you free. There comes a point in every emotionally imbalanced relationship when something inside you begins to shift. At first, it's subtle, a growing discomfort, a quiet whisper inside saying, "This doesn't feel right." You may have spent months or even years trying to win their affection, walking on eggshells, trying to be what they need, less emotional, more patient, endlessly understanding. You mistake this emotional performance for strength, thinking it makes you a better partner. But deep down, it costs you something sacred, your self-worth. When you're involved with someone avoidant, the entire dynamic hinges on your pursuit and their withdrawal. You become the one who reaches out, initiates conversations, and holds the emotional weight of the connection. And the moment you stop doing those things, the relationship feels like it's falling apart. But the truth is, it was already broken. You were just carrying both halves. The game changes the moment you understand that their pattern is predictable. It's not personal. It's not about you being too much or not enough. It's about their discomfort with closeness. It's about how intimacy triggers their internal alarm system, causing them to retreat, to devalue the connection, to protect themselves from a vulnerability they never learned to sit with. That realization is a turning point, because once you understand the pattern, you stop dancing to its rhythm. You begin to step outside of the emotional fog. The obsession with "why did they pull away" transforms into clarity. They're doing that thing again. The thing they always do when things start to feel real. It no longer feels like rejection. It feels like repetition. And when you see it as repetition, you start to break free from it. Your self-understanding becomes the most powerful shift in the entire relationship. Because once you're no longer confused, you stop reacting from a place of fear and desperation. You stop internalizing their silence. You stop trying to prove your worth through constant emotional labor. You no longer fall for the false hope of, "Maybe if I try harder this time." You finally see that their inconsistency was never a puzzle to solve, but a pattern to recognize. And when the power dynamic shifts, it's not loud or aggressive. It's subtle. You start showing up differently. You speak with more conviction. You set boundaries not to manipulate, but to protect your peace. You no longer feel desperate for their attention or approval because you've remembered your own value. The energy that once went into chasing them now goes into healing you. This change doesn't always go unnoticed. When you stop feeding the cycle with your emotional reactions, your need for closure, or your attempts to fix things, the dynamic begins to crumble. The avoidant often senses the shift, even if they don't fully understand it. They feel the gap where your emotional effort used to be, and it unsettles them, not because you've done something wrong, but because they're no longer in control of the connection. The more emotionally grounded you become, the more unstable their old patterns feel. What's most important is not how they respond, but how you feel. For the first time, you start to feel like yourself again. The version of you that isn't constantly questioning, isn't constantly hoping for scraps of affection, isn't constantly triggered by their unpredictability. You become emotionally self-sufficient, not cold, not detached, but whole. You realize you were never too much. You were simply asking for the kind of connection they weren't able to give. Understanding their pattern doesn't make you bitter. It makes you wise. And that wisdom allows you to step into relationships with new eyes, a stronger heart, and a deeper commitment to your own emotional safety. Because once you see clearly, you can never unsee it. And in that clarity, you become free. There comes a moment when the exhaustion sets in, not from the love you gave, but from the effort it took just to be seen. You've been trying, waiting, proving, explaining yourself to someone who recoils every time the connection deepens. You've held out hope through every cold silence, every delayed reply, every moment of closeness that was quickly followed by distance. But the moment you realize you're the only one fighting for something meaningful, something balanced, something mutual, you begin to reclaim something you didn't know you lost: your emotional detachment. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop attaching your peace to someone else's confusion. It means you stop internalizing their emotional unavailability as your fault. It means you learn to sit in stillness instead of rushing in to fix, chase, or explain. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's born from the growing realization that you cannot carry a relationship by yourself, that you can't make someone love you properly if they haven't even learned how to love themselves. You begin to see the pattern for what it is. The hot and cold, the inconsistency, the walls they put up when things get too real. It's no longer confusing, it's familiar. And instead of reacting with panic, you respond with clarity. You no longer run toward them when they pull away. You stop justifying their emotional absence or making excuses for their behavior. You stop rehearsing what you'll say to get through to them because you finally understand that their wall wasn't built for you. It was built long before you ever arrived. The moment you detach, not from love, but from dependency, is the moment you become powerful, because suddenly you're no longer trying to get a response, a text, a sign, or a gesture to feel okay. You've stopped outsourcing your emotional security to someone who can't even manage their own. That's what shakes them. Because for so long they had the control, they knew that every withdrawal would be met with pursuit. Every moment of coldness would be answered with your warmth. They could retreat, knowing you'd come closer to close the gap. But now the gap remains, and you no longer rush to fill it. That silence you used to be terrified of, it becomes your peace. That distance you once feared, it becomes your clarity. Emotional detachment doesn't numb you, it strengthens you. It teaches you that not everyone who triggers your feelings deserves access to your heart. It reminds you that just because someone doesn't know how to hold you doesn't mean you're too heavy. It helps you stop reacting to someone else's wounds and start healing your own. Avoidants often expect you to play a specific role. They expect you to chase, to prove, to hold it all together so they don't have to confront their own discomfort. When you step out of that role, the structure of the dynamic breaks down. They're forced to face a version of you they never expected, the version that doesn't beg, doesn't explain, and doesn't settle for half-hearted love. You don't need to punish them. Your silence is enough. Your stillness says what your words never could. I'm no longer participating in my own depletion. This shift doesn't just impact the relationship, it transforms you. Because once you learn to detach with dignity, you carry that strength into every area of your life. You stop negotiating your worth with people who are unsure. You stop shrinking for people who can't meet you where you are. You no longer chase connection. You attract it by being deeply rooted in who you are. And in that stillness, in that holy pause between reaction and response, you find a power that no avoidant pattern can touch. The power of knowing you're not for everyone, but you are absolutely enough for yourself. Something powerful happens the moment you stop accepting crumbs. Not out of anger, not out of revenge, but because something inside of you finally clicks. You remember who you are. You remember what you bring to the table. You remember that your heart, your love, your time, your presence is sacred, and it was never meant to be wasted on someone who only shows up halfway. That is the moment avoidants begin to crumble. Not because you forced them to change, but because you stopped allowing them to stay the same around you. Avoidants often thrive in ambiguity. They build their comfort in the gray areas, where feelings are suggested but never defined, where connections are deep but never fully committed, where intimacy dances on the surface but never dives into depth. And for a long time, you may have been pulled into that rhythm. You played small, stayed quiet, didn't ask for too much. You told yourself to be patient, to give them time, to not come across as needy. But in doing so, you trained yourself to expect less. You silenced your own needs in hopes of not scaring them away. You learned to tolerate the intolerable. But boundaries change the equation. Boundaries say, I am willing to meet you, but only if you're willing to meet me too. Boundaries don't demand perfection. They demand presence. They require mutual effort. And when you finally draw that line in the sand, not with cruelty, but with clarity, it does something most avoidants aren't prepared for. It removes their safety net. You are the one who made the relationship feel stable. You are the one who reassured, forgave, initiated, and accommodated. You were the emotional glue. And the moment you stop over-functioning, they begin to feel the absence of your effort. Suddenly, the connection doesn't just work on autopilot. Suddenly, your love isn't guaranteed. That emotional labor you carried so quietly becomes glaring in its absence. Here's what they don't expect: that you would walk away without slamming the door, that you would step back without the drama, without the ultimatums, without the desperate, please stay, energy, that you could leave with grace because you no longer need them to validate your worth. And that is what unravels them, because now they're not reacting to pressure, they're responding to loss, real loss. The kind where someone who truly saw them, who truly cared, no longer chooses to participate in a one-sided dynamic. Avoidants often build their identities on the illusion of control. They like to believe they're the ones who get to dictate closeness and distance. But when you hold your boundary, that illusion falls apart. You're no longer playing the role they assigned you, the one who always forgives, always stays, always tries harder. You've evolved past it. And the emotional void that creates is often the first time they're forced to sit with their own discomfort, their own patterns, their own limitations. But this transformation isn't really about them, it's about you. Setting boundaries doesn't make you hard or unloving. It makes you whole. It makes you someone who honors your needs instead of suppressing them. It makes you someone who values mutuality over potential. And in doing so, you shift your energy from proving you're worthy to simply being worthy. That quiet confidence, it's magnetic, and it unsettles anyone who once relied on your insecurity to maintain control. So yes, avoidants often crumble when you stop accepting less, not because you shamed them, but because you reminded them through action, not words, that real connection is a choice, not a chase. And if they won't meet you in the space of reciprocity, you're willing to walk away and protect your peace. And that is the greatest power you will ever hold. So here's the truth. You don't have to chase love. You don't have to shrink to be chosen. You don't have to accept emotional breadcrumbs just to feel wanted. The person who pulls away when things get close is not rejecting you. They are retreating from a truth they're not yet ready to face. But that is not your responsibility to carry, fix, or wait for. Your job is not to heal someone else's wounds at the expense of your own heart. Because real love, healthy love, doesn't leave you confused. It doesn't punish you for being open, honest, or available. It doesn't retreat every time you're brave enough to say, this is what I need. It meets you. It sees you. And most importantly, it stays. And when you finally understand that, when you stop chasing what runs, when you stop explaining your worth to people who can't receive it, when you learn to stand in the strength of your stillness rather than the noise of your pursuit, everything changes. Avoidants always crumble, not because you begged them to change, but because you changed you. You reclaimed your power. You stopped playing a role. And you finally gave yourself the love they never could. So thank you for listening, for feeling, for growing. This journey of understanding doesn't end here. It begins now with the version of you that refuses to settle for anything less than the love you deserve. Be proud of how far you've come. Protect your heart, guard your peace, and never again apologize for asking to be met where you already stand. Until next time, stay strong, stay grounded, and stay true to your worth. Thank you for being here.